You all are lucky. You get my 2 cents this morning. And I'm sure you're all thinking, it's about time for lunch now, right? Yeah. I get to talk about a topic that you all don't want to hear about from me. You don't want to hear about from anybody, probably. We're going to talk a little bit about money this morning. Or at least that's the guise of what we're going to talk about. It comes out of Luke chapter 21. It's the first 4 verses. If you want to flip there, you can. It's going to be up on the screen here in just a second. But we're going to talk about a familiar passage, I think, to most people. Even if you didn't grow up in the church, you've probably heard something about the widow's offering, the widow's gift. And that's what we're going to be looking at this morning. So if you do have your Bibles and you want to follow along, Luke chapter 21, starting in verse 1. As Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Truly I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put more in than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. Right now in our lives, money is a big topic. I mean, all we hear about in the public sphere, in news, in radio, and all that kind of stuff, again, this is not to get too political, but I'm just pointing out that everything, it seems to be centered around money right now. I mean, we're hearing about how money is being misused or misspent, if money is being stolen. We're hearing about money and finances and where it's all going. We're hearing about how our government should or shouldn't spend it. We're hearing about how we should or shouldn't spend it or what we should have. We are trying to find a way to make ends meet. Money is central in our lives at this point. And if what is going on in our country wasn't bad enough, it's also getting close to tax season. Oh, dear. So money is just becoming a thing, right? We are all trying to figure out how we're going to make ends meet. How are we going to pay bills? How are we going to come up with what we need? How in the world are we going to afford eggs? Money. Money seems to be tight. For some, others get angry because it seems like other people have all kinds of money. This morning, I want to talk to you about my 2 cents about this story. My little bit of information. And this is not an apology. This is not, I know you don't want to hear about money from me. In fact, I will tell you, you don't want to take money advice from me. It's not a wise choice. And we're talking about these things, and I don't want you to tune out because this goes way beyond just money. This story has much more to do with our hearts than it does with our wallets. That's just a symptom, or that is a tag along to the thing that's really going on, and I don't want you to miss that. We are going to talk about stuff. It seems like our world is centered around trying to gather and accumulate more and more. Whether that's money, whether that is possessions, it doesn't matter. We are surrounded by a culture that desires to get more. And we're fighting over it, who has what and how it's divided. Money is causing all kinds of problems. Wealth is causing problems. Stuff is at the center of our hearts and minds, it seems like. And so this morning we're going to talk about what do we do with it? How do we handle it? I can't give you any kind of financial advice. I'm not great with money. But what I want to try to help you understand is what Jesus was getting at, exemplifying this woman. But let's get into, first of all, what is it about money? Why is it that so many people... I know you guys probably know and understand this stuff, and I just want to give you a refresher. I want to just give you a reminder about the issue behind wealth, behind stuff, behind worldly things. Again, I know I am super proud. Maybe that's not the right thing to say, I don't know. But I am grateful to be a part of this church because I know that you guys are giving. I know that you guys are taking part in that. I know that you guys are being wise. I mean, I'm glad that we have things like that financial planning class that we've been doing on Sunday mornings. I'm glad for the fact that you guys see and recognize the need to use what God has given us wisely. And so, again, this is just an encouragement, a reminder, a refresher. I know you guys get this, but we need to be reminded sometimes of why the world is so focused on wealth and power and all those kinds of things. We need to understand what is it that they are seeking after in all of that. And you know me being a nerd. As soon as I started thinking about this, a movie popped into my head, and it might be something you guys don't care about, but did any of you ever watch Pirates of the Caribbean? I love Pirates of the Caribbean. I think it's a fantastic movie. But the thing I want you to know, there's this line in Pirates of the Caribbean. Johnny Depp, Captain Sparrow, stuck on an island, right, with Miss Swan. They've been marooned on this island, and Miss Swan doesn't know what to do. She's worrying, she's fretting, and anyway, the point is that Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp's character, has this great line. He says, do you know what the Black Pearl is? Now, Black Pearl is his ship, right? The Black Pearl is his boat that he has been seeking after and desiring for all of his life, it seems like. He's been going after this ship for as long as he can remember. He says, do you know what the Black Pearl is? It's not a keel and a hull and sails and all those things. You need those things, but you know what the Black Pearl is? The Black Pearl is freedom. See, he was striving after, he was going after, as a pirate, he was trying to get this thing. Not because of the thing itself, but because of what he thought it would bring him. He wanted the freedom that this ship offered him. And I think that is what is going on for us. Deep down inside, whether we want to admit it or not, we are striving after. The world is seeking for money and stuff, for power, for all those things, because they think that in the end it will offer them something that they really want. They're looking for freedom. They're looking for independence. They're striving for autonomy. You see, the world thinks that as soon as they get just a little bit more, somehow, some way, that will offer them the freedom that they've been desiring all of their lives. I can tell you, in my own life, this is why you don't want to take financial advice from me. I have that same attitude. I know it feels like on a daily basis, I sit here and I think, if I could just get a little bit more, I could pay that off or I could take care of that, and then I would be free because I wouldn't have to worry about that stuff. I would be finally able to take care of myself. I could stand up on my own 2 feet and I could just provide for my family if I just had a little bit more. See, do you hear what that is? The world has been convinced that if they just have enough, they can stand on their own 2 feet by themselves. They think, we have been convinced, we have been told that if we just had that 10 acres in the middle of nowhere where no one could touch us, no one could come near us, and we could raise our own chickens and our own cows and our own vegetables and all that stuff, if we could just have that, and not have the government interfere with how I live my life, then I would finally be free, independent, happy. We have been convinced that we can provide for ourselves things that are intangible, things that are hard to grasp. And because of our striving for those things, because we're desiring to create freedom on our own, Paul writes to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6, he says, the love of money. See, here's the thing. We all think that money is the root of all evil, and it's not really the money itself. Paul writes, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. You see, paper with funny pictures on it, coins with old guys' faces stamped on it, they're not the problem. The problem is that we seek after them because we think we can do for ourselves what only Jesus can do, if we just get enough of them. I can provide myself with freedom and stability. I can provide myself with independence from the world, from everyone. I don't need God to provide for me. I don't need God to do anything, because if I just have enough of those silly pieces of paper, I can get it done on my own. That's where wealth, where stuff becomes a problem. That's where the seeking after money becomes an issue of evil. It's when we have a love for it because we love it. We don't love the money itself. We love what we think it can offer us. We love what we think we can do with it. I don't want to make you think that money is evil, or if you have it, you are evil. I'm just saying that it is an easy temptation for us to fall into. If you remember back a few chapters, what we talked about in Luke before, back in Luke 18, Jesus said, he looked up and he said, "How hard is it for the rich to enter the kingdom of God? Indeed, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God." Those who hear this asked, "Who then can be saved?" And Jesus replied, and here's the key: what is impossible with man is possible with God. If you remember, Jesus said that right between meeting with the rich young ruler who turned away because Jesus told him that you've got to stop putting your focus on your money, and his meeting with Zacchaeus, who was a tax collector and had stolen all of his life, and as soon as he encountered Jesus, said, "I don't care about it anymore. I want you to take it so that I can follow you." Jesus said, what is impossible for man is possible with God. It becomes difficult for us to have our eyes and our focus on Jesus if we think that we can accomplish all that he did on our own if we just have enough. That's where it becomes a problem, and that's why the world is struggling right now, is because they think they can solve all of their problems if they just get a little bit more. They think they can provide something that doesn't come from material. Just think about it. Even if you were to get a little bit more, even if you were to get the new car or the new house, if you were to get a little bit more money, you were to get your retirement, whatever it is, if those things that we think about and desire to get, even if we get them, they are all dependent on a whole lot of other things. Your investments are dependent on all kinds of variables, and they go up and they go down, and our emotions and our state of being, our happiness, our joy goes up and down with them. As we watch, just thinking about how a couple of weeks ago, there was that AI program released by China, and suddenly our stock in AI and computing and all that kind of stuff just went whoop. And people were flipping out going, "Where's all my money? Where's all my safety and security?" We think that we can provide all these benefits through enough wealth, and yet all of those things that we are depending on are pretty fragile. Our retirements can be lost. Money can be inflated and lose value. Our stuff gets old and breaks. Believe me, I spent the last 3 weeks working on a truck because it broke, and I was going, what do I do now? We think we can provide for ourselves with things, and then we're left with the bottom falling out because those things fail us. So what is the right attitude? How do we move beyond that? What is the proper understanding of wealth? What does this lady, this widow, have to do with any of this? The thing that I think is impressive about this woman, you have to put yourself in her shoes for a second, okay? Again, you guys probably know and understand this, but have you ever just stopped and thought about what it was like for this lady to go into the temple and give this offering? So this woman is going into a place that the Herod, the king over the district of Jerusalem, has spent to this point already something like 40 years building. Imagine what you could do in 40 years. He has made amazing courtyards and colonnades. The temple itself has been restored to what the former glory was under Solomon. I mean, there is gold everywhere. There is fine linen on everything. The best craftsmen have been hired to put into this temple. This place is amazing. I mean, Josephus, the Jewish historian, he wrote the history of the Jewish people for the Roman Empire. And in his writings, when Rome conquered Jerusalem, he described going through the temple as the Romans conquered it. And he said that the temple treasury was the heart of Jewish wealth. I mean, everything that the Jewish people had essentially was in this place because of the temple tax, because of offerings, because of all the different things that were going on. I mean, this place was loaded. It would, for all of you who might be, my age, this is Scrooge McDuck's money bin, okay? This is Elon Musk's bank. This place had it all. The guys who worked there were wearing the finest robes, and they had precious stones on their clothes. I mean, this might seem silly, but have you ever stopped and thought about how often and how many animals were sacrificed in the temple on a daily basis? Could you imagine what kind of economy you would have to have in order to provide the cows, the goats, the sheep, the doves, the pigeons, all of those things for people on a daily basis? I mean, we're talking thousands of animals. And for us, well, you guys probably have a better idea of that because where we live and what we do. But imagine the kind of wealth that these people had in order to provide just animals to sacrifice, let alone to eat. This place was loaded. It had wealth beyond imagining. And this woman comes into the temple looking at all of this wealth, looking at all of this abundance, in the presence of all these people who have so much more than her. She comes in with the sun glaring off the gold into her face. She comes into this place where the offering boxes were set up so that it would make noise when you dropped your offering in. And everybody else is making all kinds of noise as they drop in their offerings. And she has these 2 small coins. They're called lepta. A lepta, or what she offers, I've heard it said that it was the equivalent of about 5 minutes in a day's work. And that's what she has. That's what she has to live on. That is, what's the phrase? I wish I had 2 pennies to rub together. That's what she has. And she comes in looking at all of this wealth, looking at all of this abundance, and she could have easily said, you know what? God doesn't need my gift. He has so much more. There is so much here that if I didn't give him what I have, he wouldn't even notice. No one would care. I could keep this. It's all I have. There is more than enough in all of this. But instead, she comes in willing to offer what she has. I mean, even look at where this is situated in Luke's gospel. Just before this, Jesus has been reprimanding some of the Pharisees and saying how they are devouring widows. They are seeking to take, in Luke chapter 20, verses 45 through 47. While all the people were listening, Jesus said to his disciples, "Beware of the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and in the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely." That's what happens before this. And right after this woman is pointed out by Jesus, in the next few verses, it says, some of the disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts decorated to God. But Jesus said, "As for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down." In the midst of people who are living in abundance, in the midst of people who are doing everything that they can to consume and bring into themselves, and in the midst of a place that shows opulence, that shows the wealth of others, this woman comes in, and instead of giving up and saying, "God doesn't need what I have," she offers it up. I feel like that's what we can kind of get into as a church. We feel like what we have is so insignificant that God doesn't need it, God doesn't want it. Why in the world would he care if I can just offer up my little bit? But Jesus points her out and says, her willingness to share the little she has is far more valuable than these people giving out of their wealth. This woman who was willing to take what little she had in this world. She could say, "God, this is all you've given me, and it's barely going to cover my food today, so can I keep it and feed myself?" But instead she took it and said, "God, you give me everything anyway. I want you to know that I am willing to give you back what I have." Can you imagine giving in the face of abundance like that? We as the church, instead of comparing ourselves to others, instead of comparing ourselves to everything else that we see and letting that determine how we feel about what God has given us, we should be looking to say, you know what? Even though this temple is adorned in gold and fine stones, and even though this has been built by the greatest craftsmen, even though this is the most wealthy place in the Middle East right now, speaking from this woman's point of view, I can still give to God. I can still honor God. It's really easy for us to look around and say, you know what, no one will notice if I don't do this. If I don't share my gifts that God has given me, if I don't share my time or my talents or my money or whatever it is. If we let the world determine our viewpoint of what God has given us, then it's always not going to be enough. But when we let God be the one who shares, when we see it through God's eyes, it's worthwhile. It's valuable. When we see what we have as a blessing from God, then it is much more than just a few cents. It is a precious gift from the Creator. So if all I have is so little, if all I have is just enough to get me by, why does God need that? Why does God want it? Let me tell you this. Please know and understand. God doesn't need your stuff. God does not need your stuff. In Psalm 50, the psalmist writes, and this is God speaking to the Israelite people, "I have no need of a bull from your stall or goats from your pens, for every animal of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird in the mountains and the insects in the fields are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine and all that is in it." Let me tell you, you need to know, I'm not up here trying to persuade you to give because God needs your money. God doesn't need your stuff. God owns it all anyway. See, the thing is, when we try to create our own freedom and independence through our wealth, through our possessions, through our stuff, we are still dependent on those things, right? We're still, like I said in the beginning, we're still putting our hope and trust in frail and fragile and broken things. God doesn't want us to give to him because he needs our stuff. He wants us to give to him because he wants us to learn to set aside those fragile things. He wants us to set aside that stuff that will fade. He doesn't want us to give him our time or our talents or our money. He doesn't want us to give up the little bit that we have just so that he can have more, but so that we can have more. We can have more of him. We can have more of freedom that won't fail. We can have more independence. And that's the weird thing that the world doesn't get. They think that if we are dependent on God, that means that we can't have our own independence. We can't live our own lives. The weird thing about God is that the more that we depend on him and the more that we realize we need him, the more he says, you know what? Here you go. Now live your life with me. The world, when you look at all kinds of religions around the world, whether it's Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, all those different things, right? We've talked about this before. They just want to consume and make their idea of heaven is that you become one with them, that everything becomes one. And when we look at Christianity, it's different because instead of saying, I want you to be another drop in the ocean, it says, I want you to be you because God created you the way or what he wanted. Now, we've messed that up, we've broken that, but when God created each one of us, he wanted us to be the people he created us to be. He gives us independence the more we are dependent on him. He doesn't want us to rely on things that are going to let us down. He doesn't want us to be fooled by things that fail. He wants us to be dependent on him. He wants us to develop dependence. He wants us to begin to train in our trust, right? The reason that God encourages giving is so that we learn not to put our trust in ourselves. I don't just let other people down, I let myself down a lot. I'm pretty unreliable, even to myself. And God is not dependent on all those things. That's the amazing thing about God. If he owns all the world, if all of it is his creation, he doesn't depend on that to be able to feed himself, take care of himself, provide for himself. He is the creator, the provider. He is the one that has all of that. So when we put our dependence in him, when we put our trust in him, he is the only thing that will not fail just because the markets go up and down. He is the only one that will not fail even when inflation happens, or when eggs are expensive. God is not contingent or dependent on those things. He is the one that owns it all. He is the one who creates it all. And so he does not change when we do, or like we do. When we put our dependence and our trust in him, it becomes something much more. This woman who should have, in the world's eyes, kept her 2 little coins and found a way to take care of herself. I mean, this woman as a widow is already going to be dependent on others because as a widow in that culture, if she doesn't have a husband or sons, then who's going to provide for her? She has to rely on the community to do it. And what little she has, she's giving away, and so now we have to provide even more for her as the community. But she is giving away what she has because she is putting her dependence onto God, saying, God, you give me all I need anyway. I want you to know that I love you and I honor you. You can have what little I have. Even though there was so much wealth around her, it could have told her that your gift isn't good enough and just take it home. But she said, God, those things don't matter. What matters is my relationship with you. What matters is if I care enough to give to you, because you are the one that provides anyway. Her trust was put into who was in control. That's what I want for us. That's what I need for us. That's what God desires from us. What we learn from this woman, this widow, I know, again, it's just a refresher, and I hope that you cling on to this, that you hold on to it tightly, that it's not about what you give, monetarily wise, value-wise. What God wants is that he wants you to realize, to understand that the most important, the most valuable, the most amazing thing is to be dependent on a God who created everything. To be trusting in the God who can provide whatever. This woman, this widow, wanted to offer up to God her best. And again, the focus is not what do I get out of it or how do I create something for myself. The focus, the purpose of it was, God, I'm going to give you everything that I have because you're going to do so much more with it. You are going to do so much better with it. Father, I will rely on you to give me what I need. Here's the thing. This woman had turned giving into worship. That's what we want. That's the desire, is that our giving is an act of worship. Not because God needs our stuff, not because it makes us look good. I mean, you've got Pharisees. This woman, again, goes into this courtyard, and all these people are trumpeting. They're exclaiming about their gifts. They're trying to make as big a deal as they can about what they're giving to God because they want people to look at them and say, oh, they're such a good person. Look how generous they are. Look how big the gift is. It was not an act of worship of God. It was an act of worshiping self. They were still putting themselves. They had turned giving to God into somehow lifting themselves up, trying to put themselves on the same level as God because of how good they were. This woman went in humbly in the face of overwhelming abundance and said, God, I want you to be honored with all that I am. I want you to be honored with all that I do. What our desire is for this church to give as an act of worship, not announcing it, not seeking praise, not seeking anything other than a recognition that God is in control, that God will provide. I mean, again, if you know your history, if you take a look at what's going on, right after this, Jesus had said, not one stone will be left on another. That wealth, that abundance, that temple that had become focused on self-praise instead of God praise was burned to the ground. All of the wealth stolen, all of the abundance taken. Remember how I said when we put our trust in those things, when we use stuff as a way to bring ourselves freedom, it doesn't end so well? Jerusalem learned that the hard way. For 2 years, they learned it the hard way until everything was destroyed and taken. But people who put their hope and their trust, who put their treasure in heaven rather than in earthly things, those things can't be stolen. They can't be taken. That treasure can't be destroyed by time or by anything else. We give to God as an act of worship to store up treasures in heaven, to give honor and glory to a God who owns it all anyway. When we store our treasures in heaven, when we give as an act of worship, it means that we are putting our hope and trust into a God who will actually provide real freedom and real abundance, who will actually provide freedom. Freedom from sin, freedom from death, freedom from things that no matter how much wealth we try to accumulate, we will never be able to defeat. When we put our hope and our trust, when we give to God, we are giving to a God who loves us and provides abundantly, who has come to give us life to the fullest. Please, I know I'm talking about in terms of money. I know I'm talking in terms of giving up your things. What I want, what I hope, what I pray is that we are worshiping God with all of who we are instead of relying on ourselves for things like independence, like freedom. It'll all crumble like Jerusalem did when we're doing it for ourselves. But when we give as an act of worship, it creates something lasting and eternal, a hope and a peace in a God who will always be. Let's pray.